Hello and welcome to Ancient Futures, where we talk about how things evolve while remaining aligned with some underlying principles. I'm Daniel Simpson, and today I'm joined by words from my forthcoming book, which is titled The Evolution of Modern Yoga, and it's now available for pre-order. The book itself is a guide to the shifts in priorities that shaped new aims and methods over the centuries, making yoga more appealing to contemporary practitioners who might not otherwise have been tempted by some of the earlier descriptions. In the process, I examine some key trends, influential teachers, and questions of authenticity and concerns about cultural appropriation, among many other topics. The overall aim of this is to explore how innovation relates to tradition. And to do that, I draw on some of the latest research from yoga scholars, which I present as accessibly as possible to tell a broader kind of story. Basically, how the ancient approach to renouncing the world that was originally known as yoga became part of the globalized wellness industry. So, in this episode, I give you a bit of a taste of all of that through a reading from the introduction and some reflections on how all of this connects to things I've talked about already, including in my previous book, The Truth of Yoga. Now, this new one will be published in the next few months. If you're listening to this at the time of release, or if you're listening in the future, it may well be out there already. You can find out more either way, along with how to pre-order a copy at the link in the show notes, which is modernyoga.online. And to complement all of this information, why not join us for my year-long course, The Path of Knowledge, which starts in September and gets into a lot more detail about each phase of yoga history and what that means for practitioners today. To find out more about that, see again the link in the show notes or go to truthofyoga.com. And finally, for more about this podcast and to make a contribution to help keep it going, visit ancientfutures.substack.com. I depend entirely on donations to support what I do here, whether that's in the form of a paying subscription or the virtual coffees that people buy me by clicking a link. So if you do find it helpful, please consider doing either of those, or alternatively spreading the word and helping other people to find the podcast by reviewing it or rating it or sharing the link. For now, though, let's get immersed in how the things that we inherit meet what they're becoming via the evolution of modern yoga. So, welcome to this preview of my new book. It's not an easy thing to summarize in a few minutes, partly because it's 300 pages long. Also, because it covers the entirety of yoga history to a certain extent, although it does focus in particular on modern yoga. The developments of the last 200 years or so are really the main area of interest that I wanted to go a bit deeper into than I had the opportunity to do in my last book, The Truth of Yoga. And I basically came to write it after finishing that book and talking a lot about it and realizing that while it was indeed very helpful to put together some short summaries of key themes from the main yoga texts and also the findings of yoga scholars about how things have changed over the centuries, that a lot of people wanted to hear more about modern practice. Where do things actually come from? How have they been influenced perhaps by things from outside of what we might think of as yoga traditions? Can we trust what we are told within modern yoga lineages about their history, where things have been combined in ways that perhaps teachers did not openly admit to? And what can we learn about that process of combination that gave us modern systems of practice, which, although very different in many ways to things we find in earlier sources, do preserve a connection to some of the core principles of yoga philosophy. And those are not necessarily present in modern globalized yoga in the 21st century marketplace. And I find that fascinating. So I suppose part of my inspiration in trying to zero in on all of this is to think about what it can teach us, not just about the past and how the past might be of some benefit to us in the present while we think about making sense of what we do, but also how it might inspire us to do something similar in our own engagement with this thing that we call yoga. How does it relate to earlier incarnations of things with that name? And what might need to be perhaps added back into the mix in order to preserve some of the spirit of earlier principles that may to some extent have fallen by the wayside because of the change in priorities. And so I don't structure the book as a didactic exercise in saying, thou shalt think about all that. Instead, it tries to tell a story. It's an overview of how things have changed, looking at the themes that are of most relevance, to my mind at least, in trying to make sense of it all. But there are some questions for reflection at the end of each chapter, which provide a bit of a springboard to that inquiry process. And I hope that the book as a whole sows seeds of questions about what it means to be a practitioner. And therefore, although it is a more scholarly book than my previous one, partly in the terms of its production. It has footnotes, for example. It has a detailed list of further reading on the topics that are addressed in each of the chapters. It is also quite consciously situating itself within the world of yoga scholarship, as in drawing on the stuff that other people have found out, acknowledging my debt to them in rearranging that information into my own new synthesis, and at the same time, not trying to suggest that I've done something pioneering and new here. What I've really done, hopefully, is a service to make a lot of that detail and depth of understanding that yoga academics have a little bit more accessible, a little bit more tailored to the practitioner community than it inevitably is when it's produced by scholars for scholars. Although scholars are, in their own way, very capable of speaking to practitioners, that's not what they do for a living most of the time. And I think there is therefore a place in the library of yoga stuff for a book of this sort that tries to draw on all the strands of research from the ancient origins of yoga through to the development of modern practice systems, taking the key insights from the researchers who are the experts and combining those themselves into a synthesis. So in a way, it's a meta version of the project of producing a modern postural yoga lineage in that sense. It's mixing and matching from here and there, but I'm trying to show the working behind what I'm doing, making it clear whose research I'm drawing on, but also trying to show where you can go to find out more if you need a little bit more context on something that I'm saying. And so in that sense, I think the academic apparatus of referencing and footnotes can be very helpful. But if you're not interested in that, you can just skip over it and hopefully have an entertaining read. That was my intention when writing this book. As I say, it grew out of my earlier explanations of how yoga history is of benefit to a practitioner when considering what it means to be, let's say, authentic, a word that in itself could do with some unpacking in the 21st century. And I feel that there is a place really in the practitioner world for this academic understanding. But it's helpful, I think, to provide some sort of a way in. And having given the overview, in my previous book, as I say, I wanted to dive a little bit deeper and start to show how we might explore a little bit further should we be interested. And really, I'm saying all this now. The book is on its way out, not quite yet in shops or internet portals at the time of recording. But this is actually a very important time as a writer to be talking about work that one has done that is about to come out. Because now that it's available for pre-order, that means that there is a chance to generate some momentum, to show the invisible algorithm that there is interest in this book so that it might recommend it to others when suggesting new things that they look at. Also suggesting perhaps to retailers that they might consider stocking this book. And if you are moved to investigate it for yourself, perhaps you might go to your local bookstore and suggest they get a couple copies in, see how it does. It's got a very nice cover, it will look good on display, and what's inside will be really of very great interest to anybody who's serious about understanding where modern yoga practice comes from. And that therefore means perhaps it's a very helpful book to assign to people in teacher trainings, particularly advanced teacher trainings, people who've got a good foundation in what I was presenting in my last book, what's in the main yoga texts and some of the basics of how things have changed over time, and are instead looking to get more capable of talking to students about some of these questions that inevitably arise when they open the Yoga Sutras and find there aren't sequences of postures of the sort they've been taught in classes. I mean, obviously there's yoga in the world today that isn't all about postures, but this is the overwhelming focus of a lot of what happens under the name of yoga in the modern context around the world. And really, it therefore, I think, is important to get a handle on why that happened. And what we might do to ensure that that phenomenon still maintains a certain amount of connection to all of the other things that might otherwise get airbrushed out of the picture in pursuit of health and wellness, a beach-ready body, or whatever else might be marketed by people trying to entice you into their workshops. So I think all of that is there as my sort of motivation for talking about it now. But I also feel that it's just of ongoing interest to me to keep talking about these topics. Those who've heard me, presenting courses or teaching on yoga teacher trainings will have heard plenty of this before. But what I've done in this book is a little bit more than I've presented in a lot of those contexts, because there's a bit more space and because there's a chance to tell more of an ongoing story than there is time for in the average workshop. If I was to literally read it out, that would take all day. And it's listening to me talk all day is not that helpful. So when I'm teaching, even if I have a whole day on a yoga teacher training, I'm trying to get others to speak amongst themselves, to bring their questions to me, and to respond to a few key pointers, the edited highlights of what's in this book. And so I think, having this as a springboard for talking about what's in it is a great opportunity to remind myself and others that it's always important to keep talking about these ideas, because it's not really a book to just sort of read and put away, or a book to have on the shelf and pull down for reference. I think of it really as a conversation starter. It draws very much on books that have already started plenty of conversations, but I hope that it will help to give sufficient context that people who were slightly put off by what yoga academics have been saying about modern yoga, to start to see how maybe they didn't quite give it a fair hearing. Because I think there's been some wonderful research done in the last generation, and it deserves a wider audience, and it deserves not to be understood in perhaps a misguided way as an attack on modern yoga practice, which is certainly how the best known book of yoga research on modern practice did get misinterpreted. Yoga Body by Mark Singleton. That was the springboard to me deciding to go to university in my 40s and do a master's degree. And that led to me teaching, that led to me writing The Truth of Yoga, that led to me then doing what I'm doing now, talking on this podcast. And Mark is about to release another book. He's continued to be very involved in the kind of research that is at the cutting edge of yoga studies on which I'm drawing, whether that's in collaboration with Jim Mallinson on Roots of Yoga, showing all of the different sources that we might not pay so much attention to when we focus on the handful that I dealt with in The Truth of Yoga, have really changed the ideas, the theories behind yoga practice, and the methods of practice themselves. And so I'm drawing heavily on that sort of work in this book. I'm also drawing on his more recent collaborations with Jason Birch, looking at the texts that have influenced pioneers of modern postural yoga, such as Krishnamacharya. And luminaries like that are really the foundation of what I'm doing in this book. I'm not by myself coming up with lots of ideas. I am dependent, really, on the work that's been done. I'm using my skills as I was originally a journalist, but somebody who likes to communicate, somebody who likes to distill ideas into pithy posts on social media. Using those sort of inclinations to try to bring some of that information out of the more dense world of academic publications to the practitioner community. And so it's not academic in the sense of being abstract. It's definitely designed for people who are engaged in yoga. It hopefully helps them rather than feeling like it's hitting them around the head and telling them they got everything wrong. It is hopefully engaging, hopefully entertaining, and no less a person than Mark Singleton has been kind enough to endorse the book and to say that it is clear and engaging in the way that it's been written. So I'm very grateful and in many ways very humbled to have his endorsement and also to be in a position where somebody whose work has been so integral to my own writing is appreciating what I'm doing with their work. I may as well just read it out since I'm talking about it. An accessible and comprehensive study by one of the brightest voices in yoga scholarship today. I'll interrupt it to say I'm not sure I'm really a scholar, but I'll take the compliment and be very grateful. Going back to Mark's comments, there is no other book on the topic of modern yoga that presents the subject with such mastery, clarity, and care for the reader's experience. So I mention all that again, not to try and say, isn't this great? Isn't my book the best book? The one true yoga book, the book that everybody should buy. That's not the point here. I'm really trying to underline that I see some value in what I'm doing, and I hope you will too if you read it. And I'm going to give you a taste of it in just a moment to see whether you think it sounds promising. But most of all, I'm really just trying to say that there is something that I'm doing here that I think is helpful in general. And whether you come to me to hear about it or look for it somewhere else is really the same to me. I'm just keen to promote discussion that encourages critical reflection, inquiry, and fruitful development of a clear understanding of where we stand in relation to the past and where we're going from here into the future in order to preserve, let's say, some of the integrity of yogic tradition. There's a lot of concern in recent times about cultural appropriation, which is something I certainly talk about in the book, but as outsiders to a tradition, when this whole evolutionary process has taken place against the backdrop of colonialism, it can be quite daunting to think about what we do in response to all of that. And I'm certainly not suggesting that we should ignore all of those things, but I want to talk about context. I want to give people tools for thinking critically about context, understanding which contexts have got neglected as a result of the globalization and commercialization of yoga. But not to suggest, erroneously in my view, that there is some way of rewinding the clock to a purer version of yoga, or even more, that there is a need somehow to defer to sources of knowledge from the Indian subcontinent, and that whoever is sharing their message that yoga has a particular flavor that needs to be included, we are entitled to reflect on that and weigh it up and decide whether or not it makes any sense to us to prioritize that way of seeing. Because otherwise, we're laying ourselves open to decolonizing yoga by recolonizing our minds with a different form of propaganda, perhaps with strong political agendas of various kinds, from Hindu nationalism to a sort of idealized form of social justice activism that almost disentangles yoga from yogic tradition. And I think we need to be careful about either of those things, and just to be thinking responsibly about what we're doing in relation to traditions that have come from contexts, to use that word again, that might be very different to the one we inhabit, that we might not see as the blueprint for where we go next in the 21st century, but might still have core principles that we can adapt a little bit to ensure that they stay relevant. That to me is a more helpful way to engage with this sort of a question than to try and somehow get pure, because I don't think there's a possibility. We're all, to a certain extent, corrupted by our involvement in modern society. Never mind, yogic traditions. But there's always been, as the book illustrates, a process of cultural exchange in the development of systems of practice, philosophical frameworks for explaining them, and even transmission. All around different cultures, initially, within Asia, more recently from east to west and west to east and back again so many times, it's hard to unravel. And rather than trying to unravel it completely, I think we just need to be clear about what realities we're weaving for ourselves by drawing on some of these threads today. So that's really my statement of intent around it all. I think the last thing I should probably say is in relation to the process of producing this. It grew out of research I was doing for a course I produced at the Oxford Centre for Hindu Studies, where I've been teaching now for 10 years. And in that context, the whole mission of the OCHS is to combine scholarly rigor, so verifiable, reliable, reputable information, with concern for lived experience, practice, and the idea that people might want to do something with this knowledge rather than just sort of hear it as dry information for cogitation and cognitive processing, which is sometimes what happens in the academic world. Instead, this is a context in which people are looking to get inspired, and I certainly hope that there will be some form of inspiration that the book provides. But depends really on the reader's inclinations, what form that might take. Nonetheless, what I've tried to do is structure it in a way that makes it easily digestible. It's not quite as short and pithy as the Truth of Yoga's 100, 500 word chapters. It's a little bit more extended. There are 7 chapters covering core themes. I'll talk about those in a moment when you hear me read from the introduction. But inside each chapter, there are subheadings. Things are broken down in a way that's thematic. And there are, as I said, questions for reflection to help to tie things together and open the door to wherever people would like to take that sort of inquiry. It could be a great book for a book club in that sense. Perhaps I shall offer one myself. Before I take you into the reading, though, I should perhaps read what's on the back cover, because that gives a pretty coherent summary in and of itself. And it says this: Before the modern era, most yogis were men who renounced worldly life. Non-seated postures, first mentioned in texts about 1,000 years ago, served as warm-ups for subtler techniques, and the ultimate goal was to sit like a stone. The average modern yoga class, by contrast, is predominantly female and centered on postural sequences for health and well-being. How did an ancient approach to renouncing the world become a branch of the globalized wellness industry? In The Evolution of Modern Yoga, scholar practitioner Daniel Simpson offers a lucid and accessible guide to how the aims and methods of yoga have transformed over the centuries. Drawing on the latest research in the rapidly growing field of yoga studies, Simpson examines key trends, influential teachers who shaped the development of contemporary forms, issues of authenticity, concerns about cultural appropriation, and questions of ownership. Bringing clarity to a complex history, The Evolution of Modern Yoga presents a compelling account of how the most prevalent forms of yoga taught around the world today relate to earlier traditions in an engaging style that will be equally appealing to dedicated students of yoga and curious readers. So, without further ado, I shall hand over to myself to give you a taste of what it sounds like. The Evolution of Modern Yoga by Daniel Simpson. Introduction. This book explores the origins of modern forms of yoga, what shaped their development, and how they relate to earlier traditions. Before we begin, it might be helpful to reflect on the meaning of both modern and yoga, which have a range of definitions. Modern is used here in the sense of, quote, relating to the present and recent times, close quote, to quote the Oxford English Dictionary. However, there are also connotations of, quote, embracing innovation and new ideas, close quote, which can sometimes imply, quote, a departure from traditional styles or values, close quote. Yoga is a little more complex. In the Monier-Williams Sanskrit English Dictionary, the word is defined across multiple pages, with almost 40 entries and a long list of compounds. Many of these meanings have nothing to do with contemporary practice. The oldest usage involved animals and chariots, and yoga was, quote, the act of yoking, close quote, them together. When the dictionary was compiled in the 19th century, barely half a dozen entries on yoga referred to philosophy, and of these, only one described the system in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, involving, quote, concentration of the thoughts, abstract contemplation, meditation, close quote. None of them mentioned a practice based on sequences of postures, yet this is now by far the most common understanding. If one were to stop a random stranger almost anywhere on earth and ask what yoga meant, the majority would almost certainly talk about asana. This Sanskrit word, which literally means sitting or seat, has itself been transformed to refer to a range of complex shapes. That process began 1,000 years ago, as we shall see. But even once a variety of non-seated postures was taught in texts, they were not made the primary focus of practice until much more recently. It is important to note that not all systems of yoga prioritize postures. However, those that do have become much more popular than most of the others, so they get more attention. This book charts the history of how that occurred, tracing key developments in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and seeing how these have influenced the globalization of physical practices. It is not an exhaustive guide to all methods of yoga. There is insufficient space to discuss their distinctions. Instead, it highlights important trends that serve to explain how an ancient Indian practice of renouncing the world has spawned a worldwide industry promoting well-being. To illustrate how much has changed, we begin with a discussion of the origins of yoga in ascetic traditions. Most early teachings saw the body as a source of distraction from spiritual goals. Its sensory desires kept people entangled in cycles of suffering that spanned endless lifetimes. So the answer was to focus within and disengage. The primary form of practice was meditation. It involved sitting still while restraining the mind and the senses to see beyond a limited sense of self. Some also subjected their bodies to deliberate discomfort to help them detach, undertaking such austerities as standing on one leg for years on end. As we explore in Chapter 2, priorities changed with the influence of Tantra, whose practices transformed the body and how it was perceived, as opposed to transcending it. This shaped the development of the physical methods of Hatha Yoga, which used non-seated postures as part of preparations for subtler techniques. The latter mainly worked with the breath and other forms of vitality, sealing the torso in positions called mudras, which propelled energy up the spine to dissolve the mind. However, early Hatha Yoga was still quite different to modern postural practice in both its aims and its means. Over the centuries, it became more dynamic, including a wider range of non-seated asanas, sometimes even using them to cultivate strength and flexibility. As Hatha Yoga grew in popularity, physical practice was combined with teachings from earlier traditions. This process accelerated in the modern era, creating new hybrids of Indian philosophy that blur the distinctions between different systems. For example, although Patanjali's Yoga Sutra is based on the dualist philosophy of Sankhya, many teachers now explain it using non-dual ideas from Vedanta and Tantra. In the 19th century, thinkers from Vivekananda to Western esotericists began presenting yoga in connection with theories that would shape New Age thinking. We examine this in Chapter 3, seeing how eclecticism helped spawn new practices, a process that continues in more recent developments such as, quote, yin yoga, close quote. Although some of what is taught today has ancient roots, other components are relatively new, from sequences of postures to sun salutations. As we see in Chapter 4, some of the most popular standing asanas, including warriors and triangles, first appear in texts in the 20th century, when yoga and exercise became less distinct. It is difficult to say where these postures came from, but there are parallels with martial arts and gymnastics. And while many teachers borrowed ideas from non-yogic sources, few acknowledged it openly, preferring instead to disguise their innovations. Perhaps the most influential of these pioneers was T. Krishnamacharya, who taught, among others, B.K.S. Iyengar and K. Patabi Jois, whose respective focus on postural alignment and flowing sequences provide the foundations of many modern classes. Chapter 5 charts the shift in objectives that made yoga more appealing to urban householders. Along with new methods that focused on postures and group classes in which to present them, teachers highlighted yoga's healing potential, promoting health and wellness as ends in themselves. In the early 20th century, many sought to prove its effectiveness by scientific means. Two, in particular, who had the same guru, shaped this process: Swami Kuvalayananda and Sri Yogendra. Prescribing treatments based on asana, breath control, pranayama, and cleansing techniques, kriyas, to the public, they framed yoga as therapy, pioneering the modern idea of healing anything from back pain to complex trauma. They also use the language of progress, which others have embraced with technological metaphors. Perhaps the most striking difference between yoga today and earlier incarnations is the prevalence of women. Chapter 6 reflects on the changes that brought this about. Most traditional texts were composed by men and describe male ascetics, but there are also occasional references to female practitioners. They became much more widespread with the popularization of householder yoga, particularly once it spread beyond India. Yet even before this, the influence of women on yoga's development was significant. Ideas from female traditions of, quote, harmonic gymnastics, close quote, as well as the disciplines of Pilates and somatics directly influenced Indian teachers. Some scholars even argue that the average modern yoga class owes more to Western women than to medieval texts on Hatha yoga. In light of the exchange of ideas between East and West and the colonial context in which it took place, the final chapter highlights debates about the ownership of yoga. Commercialization is nowadays rampant, and cultural appropriation is a mainstream concern. Meanwhile, politicians have taken advantage of yoga's popularity. One notable example is India's promotion of an International Day of Yoga, held with United Nations backing. However, this apparently innocuous event has sparked a backlash due to its links with Hindu nationalism. We reflect on how these issues affect modern efforts to decolonize yoga and also consider the broader question of authenticity. As practices change, what keeps them anchored in tradition? Not everything is yoga because someone says it is, but policing what other people do seems at best a distraction. We conclude with some thoughts on what it means to be authentic in the 21st century. Well, I hope you enjoyed that brief sample. There will be an audiobook to accompany publication, as well as an ebook that will be available on all the usual platforms. More information about that in due course. For now, though, I think that's probably enough from me on the subject, at least for the moment. If you have any questions, do feel free to send me a message, whether that's in relation to ordering the book, either for yourself or into a store, or perhaps you'd like to talk to me on a podcast, or there might be something else that arose as a result of what you've heard. Any of those apply, I'd be delighted to hear from you. I'll also be back again soon with a more conventional podcast talking to somebody else about their book. For now, though, I shall leave it here, wish you well, and look forward to next time.